lengths the former president and his allies went trying to overturn his 2020 election loss. Among that new reporting is then White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, who played a key role in trying to convince Pence he had the authority to stop the certification, sending an email to a top aide for the former vice president detailing a plan to undo Joe Biden's election win. The memo was written by former Trump lawyer Jenna Ellis and centered around the vote totals of 6 battleground states that Trump insisted he won. Joining us now with more on that and the final days of the Trump presidency, Chief Washington correspondent for ABC News, Jonathan Karl. The new book is titled Betrayal: The Final Act of the Trump Show.
You know, Jonathan, it looks like a clown show, except for the fact that these people were in the White House, they had power, and they were trying to overthrow the United States government, or at least overthrow an election of a duly elected president, when every federal judge, including all those appointed by Donald Trump, said there was absolutely nothing to these charges. So what was your takeaway talking to Donald Trump and digging into this as deeply as you did?
Well, first of all, I think that the role of Mark Meadows that was just mentioned by Mika there is incredibly important, because there's been a lot of talk about the memo written by John Eastman, this outside lawyer who advised Trump. No, this was right in the White House. This was the White House chief of staff. This was one of his campaign lawyers outlining a very specific plan with dates and times that was all centering on Mike Pence obeying the orders of Donald Trump. And it was a plan that, if Pence had gone along with, would have resulted in a much bigger constitutional crisis than what we saw. And, Joe, what I found is that's just one example of where this could have gone off the rails, and almost did go off the rails, even in a more spectacular way than it actually did.
Yeah. Well, just one example, but Jonathan, let's just stop for a second. A shocking example. A guy who was a member of the United States Congress goes over to work for the White House, and he is actively working to overthrow the United States government, to overthrow the duly elected president of the United States. It's absolutely staggering. And you're reporting how widespread was the contempt that Donald Trump's staff members had for the United States Constitution, for the peaceful transfer of power, for political and constitutional norms.
And I'll add one other, for sanity. Mark Meadows played a role throughout this, and Joe and Mika, I document this chapter and verse, the role that Meadows played during the transition to chase down, to pursue every harebrained scheme that Donald Trump had, every conspiracy theory to try to undo what is really the central miracle of American democracy, a peaceful transition of power. Meadows was using the intelligence agencies, was pressuring the Pentagon, the Justice Department, and then doing this in the end with Mike Pence. Much of this not known at the time. You know, he just played this role of trying to use all means necessary to effectuate what really would have been a coup. I mean, let's call it what it would have been. It was a coup, overturning a proper election.
So, Jonathan, I know this guy. I've had breakfast with this guy many times, talking about when he was still in Congress, giving him advice on focusing more on issues that matter to Americans than some of the crazy stuff the Freedom Caucus was going after. I'm sure you've talked to him a good bit as well. He's a likable guy. But he's also a likable guy who tried to overthrow the United States government. I guess none dare call it treason, but that's what it would be called at any other time other than right now. So in reporting on this book, did you get to the motivation for why people who had seemed to be supposedly good people in their past lives moved into the Trump White House, moved into the Trump sphere, and did things that no one would have ever believed they would have done 4 or 5 years ago?
Well, I think that a big part of it, Joe, was fear. And this is why another theme in the book is the role of Johnny McEntee, who was the guy that carried Trump's bags during the campaign and during the first year of the Trump presidency before he was fired for issues in his FBI background check. He comes back to the Trump White House in early 2020 and is put in charge of presidential personnel. And really what he does is he conducts a purge of the executive branch, firing or intimidating into silence anybody who would dare do anything to disagree or contradict or to challenge or to question what Donald Trump wanted to do. So by the time you get to the transition, there's really nobody left around Donald Trump except for those that are all in and willing to do whatever it is that he wants to do. Or they're there, but they're cowed into silence. There are a couple of exceptions, which I talk about in the book, but by and large, they're all in for whatever Trump wants.
So, so Jonathan, it really is shocking. I mean, you obviously, you would expect that of people who had been his golf caddy before or worked at his golf course. Actually, I wouldn't expect that of any American. Treason is treason. But you have mainstream Republican figures that again, were willing to betray the United States, its Constitution, peaceful transfer of power. What about people like Bill Stepien, who were respected and would be so, people would reach out to have him work on their campaigns? Like, what about people like that got into his orbit and got involved in this?
Well, I get into that. There's people like Bill Stepien and Justin Clark, people that were involved in the campaign, who, when Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell came in with all the wild conspiracy theories and all of that, they basically took a step aside.